5 years after my parents helped me buy my apartment, they showed up to dinner with a piece of notebook paper that almost cost me everything. I've been sitting on this story for almost 8 months, waiting until everything was fully resolved before I shared it. Now that the dust has settled and the attorneys have all gone home, I think it's time. Grab a coffee. This one's long, and it earns every word. Background: who we are and how we got here. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 36 years old, a senior project manager at a mid-sized logistics company in Columbus, Ohio. I'm not rich, but I've worked methodically and carefully to build something stable for myself: a career, a savings account, and 5 years ago, a 2-bedroom condominium in a quiet neighborhood on the east side of the city. My parents are Richard and Carol Mercer, both retired school teachers from a small town about 90 minutes south of Columbus. They are not wealthy people by any objective measure, but they are comfortable: a paid-off house, modest retirement accounts, Social Security, and the particular pride that comes from having raised 3 children who, as my father used to say, turned out decent. My younger brother is Kyle, 31, who lives at home with our parents and has, for as long as I can remember, struggled to find his footing. He's not a bad person. I want to be clear about that from the start. But he has made consistently poor financial decisions, and at some point in the last several years, my parents began quietly rerouting their own resources in his direction while maintaining the appearance of treating us equally. My younger sister is Amber, 33, who lives in Pittsburgh with her husband and 2 kids and has wisely stayed as far from the situation as geographically possible. 5 years ago, when I was 31 and had been saving aggressively for nearly 4 years, I was close to having enough for a down payment on a condo. I needed $20,000 more to get to a comfortable 20% and avoid PMI. My parents called me one Sunday afternoon and told me they wanted to help. My dad said, and I remember this clearly, because I was standing in my apartment kitchen making pasta when he said it, "We want to give you something to help you get started. Consider it our gift to you." My mother echoed it. "It's a gift, Danny. Don't make it weird." I thanked them. I transferred the money. I closed on my condo 11 weeks later. I have lived there for 5 years, paid every mortgage payment on time, and built approximately $67,000 in equity in addition to the down payment itself. I never made it weird. They did. Part 1. The Sunday dinner that changed everything. 7 months ago, in August, I drove down to my parents' house for a Sunday dinner. These happen about once a month. Nothing special, just the kind of ritual that holds families together. My brother Kyle was there, which was normal since he lived there. What was not normal was the energy in the room when I walked in. My father was quiet in the particular way he gets when he's rehearsed something. My mother was overwarm, which is her tell. Kyle wouldn't meet my eyes. The green beans were slightly overcooked, which only happens when my mother is distracted. I noticed all of these things. I am, professionally, someone who reads rooms for a living. I coordinate large teams and complicated logistics. I am paid to see patterns before they become problems. We ate. We made small talk. And then, as my mother was clearing the plates, my father set down his napkin and said, "Daniel, we need to talk to you about the money we gave you for the condo." I looked at him. "Okay," I said. What followed was one of the most disorienting conversations of my adult life. My father explained, calmly, in the measured tone he once used to explain algebra to 8th graders, that the $20,000 had not, in fact, been a gift. It had been, he said, a family share. An investment in family property. He said that at the time, they had considered it a gift, but that they had since come to understand that it was more appropriately categorized as a contribution to a family asset, and that as such, Kyle was entitled to either a proportional interest in the property or reimbursement of his share. I stared at him for a long moment. "Kyle's share," I repeated. "We've helped Kyle with some things too," my mother said quickly. "We just want things to be fair." "What things?" I asked. Long pause. "Different things," she said. I asked, as calmly as I could manage, what exactly they were proposing. My father slid a piece of paper across the table. It was handwritten, not a legal document, not anything formal, just a piece of notebook paper with my father's handwriting on it. It said that I could either repay $20,000 to the family fund within 6 months, or I could add Kyle to the deed of my condominium as a co-owner with a 40% interest. 40% of the home I had purchased, lived in, maintained, and paid a mortgage on for 5 years. I looked at Kyle, who was staring at the table. I looked at my father. I looked at my mother. I picked up the piece of paper, folded it carefully, and put it in my jacket pocket. "I'll think about it," I said. I drove home in the kind of silence that is actually very loud. Part 2. The paper trail and the phone call I almost didn't make. That night I did 2 things. First, I opened my email and searched every message I had ever exchanged with my parents. I searched my texts. I searched my iCloud backups. I was looking for any documentation of the original conversation, anything that established what the $20,000 was intended to be. I found it in 45 minutes. 3 emails. One from my mother, sent the week before the transfer, that said, "Dad and I talked it over and we want you to have this as a gift. No strings, no repayment, just our way of helping you get started. We're proud of you." One from my father, sent the same day as the transfer itself, that said, "Money sent. Congratulations in advance. This is your money now, consider it done." And one from my mother, sent the day after I closed on the condo, that said, "So happy for you. Enjoy your new home. You earned this, and the little bit we added was just love from us to you." 3 emails. Crystal clear. Sent voluntarily, with no prompting from me, over a period of about 3 months. I also found the bank wire confirmation showing the transfer from their account to mine, with the memo line reading, "Gift, down payment." They had written, "gift," in the memo line. I sat with this for a while. Then I called my friend Marcus, who is an attorney. He does estate planning and real estate law, and asked if he had 20 minutes. He said yes. I summarized the situation. He was quiet for a moment and then said, "Dan, forward me those emails tonight." I did. He called me the next morning. He said, "This is not a complicated legal situation. A gift is a gift. There is no legal mechanism by which your parents can retroactively reclassify a documented, transferred gift as a family investment without your agreement. The emails alone would make this an extremely difficult case to pursue in court, and the memo line on the wire transfer is almost comically helpful to your position." He paused. "What do you want to do?" I thought about it. I thought about my brother Kyle, who I didn't believe had engineered this, but who hadn't stopped it either. I thought about my parents, who I believed genuinely thought they were being fair and had somehow convinced themselves that memory was more reliable than documentation. I thought about the equity in my home, which I had built through 5 years of mortgage payments, maintenance costs, and property tax. I thought about what it would mean to let this go quietly versus what it would mean to let it metastasize into something worse. "I want to handle this correctly," I said. "I don't want to destroy my family. But I also can't let this stand." Marcus said he understood. We made a plan. Part 3. The letter that arrived on a Tuesday. Marcus drafted a letter. It was professional, measured, and precise. It outlined the following: that the $20,000 transfer in question had been explicitly and repeatedly characterized as a gift by both Richard and Carol Mercer in written communications, that the bank transfer memo corroborated this characterization, that as a matter of established law, a completed gift, particularly one accompanied by clear donative intent expressed in writing, cannot be retroactively reclassified or reclaimed by the donor, and that any attempt to pursue legal action to enforce the family fund arrangement described in the handwritten document would not only be without merit but would also require disclosure of all relevant communications in discovery, which would substantially undermine any claim the plaintiffs might assert. The letter also noted, politely but clearly, that the condominium's deed was not available for modification without Daniel Mercer's voluntary consent, which would not be forthcoming, and that any attempt to file a lease pendens or cloud the title of the property would be met with an immediate legal response. Marcus sent it via certified mail. Return receipt requested. My mother called me 4 hours after it was delivered. She was crying. She said she couldn't believe I had lawyered up against my own family. She said she felt blindsided. She said she thought we could have worked this out like adults. I told her very gently that I had tried to work it out like an adult at the Sunday dinner table, and that when I said, "I'll think about it," I meant it. I had thought about it, consulted a professional, and my answer was no. She said, "Danny, this isn't about money. This is about fairness." I asked her to explain to me what was fair about retroactively removing equity from a property I had paid a mortgage on for 5 years. Long silence. "Kyle needs help," she finally said. "He's struggling, and we've spent a lot helping him, and we just wanted to balance things out." I felt something shift in my chest, not anger, exactly, but a kind of sad clarity. "Mom," I said, "if Kyle needs help, I'm happy to talk about ways to actually help Kyle. But I'm not going to deed part of my home to a man who doesn't live there and didn't pay for it. That's not help. That's something else." She hung up. My father didn't call at all. Amber texted me that night, "What on earth is happening?" Mom called me in tears. I called Amber and told her everything. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "I knew something was going on. They've been funneling money to Kyle for 2 years. I just didn't know how much." "How much?" I asked. "A lot," she said. Update 1. 6 weeks after the letter. The first update came from an unexpected direction. My parents, having received the legal letter and apparently consulted with someone themselves, I later learned it was a friend of my father's who had taken one business law class in 1987, sent a response through that same friend as informal advisor rather than an actual attorney. The response essentially restated their original position with more emotional language and less legal clarity. It referenced family agreements and moral obligations and the spirit of how the money was given. Marcus read it and described it, charitably, as not a legal argument. Meanwhile, Amber had been doing some quiet digging of her own. She had a closer relationship with my parents' financial patterns than I did, and over the course of several phone calls with each of them, separately, she is clever, she had pieced together a rough picture of what had actually been happening. Kyle, it turned out, had borrowed approximately $34,000 from my parents over the preceding 2 years. Not borrowed in any formal sense. There were no promissory notes, no repayment schedules, no documentation of any kind. Just transfers, in amounts ranging from $800 to $6,000, made whenever he called with a crisis. A car repair, a missed rent payment, a credit card balance, a business idea that never launched. My parents had rationalized this, apparently, by deciding that the $20,000 they had given me constituted a similar investment, and that Kyle was therefore owed equivalent treatment. The problem with this reasoning was that it ignored the fundamental difference between a documented gift to a working, self-sufficient adult for the purchase of real property and a series of undocumented bailouts made to an adult living rent-free in their home. But here's the thing. None of that was my legal problem. My legal position was unambiguous. What Amber's discovery did was give me a clearer understanding of the emotional mechanics at play, which mattered for what came next. I called my father. Not through Marcus, not by letter. I called him myself on a Wednesday evening, and I said, "Dad, I'd like to have coffee with you. Just us. No lawyers, no mom, no Kyle. I want to understand what you actually want here." He agreed. He sounded tired. Update 2. The coffee that rebuilt something. We met at a diner halfway between Columbus and his town, on a Saturday morning in October. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner booth with his hands wrapped around a mug. He looked older than I remembered, which was probably just the context making me see him differently. I sat down. We ordered. We were quiet for a minute. Then I said, "Tell me what's actually going on." And my father, my methodical, proud, private father, told me. He and my mother had, over the past several years, been quietly panicking about Kyle. Not because of any single crisis, but because of the accumulated weight of all of them. They had begun to worry, in the specific way that parents of struggling adult children worry, that Kyle would never be stable. That he would need support indefinitely. That there would come a day when they were gone and he would have nothing and no one. They had decided, wrongly, I believe, but not maliciously, that the solution was to give Kyle a stake in something stable. An asset. And since I had an asset, and since they had helped me acquire it, they had constructed a logic in which redirecting part of that asset to Kyle was an act of family stewardship rather than what it actually was, which was taking something from one child to give to another without asking. "Dad," I said carefully, "I understand why you're worried about Kyle. I am too. But what you asked me to do would have put me in a legal and financial relationship with a co-owner on my home that I did not agree to. Do you understand what that means?" He looked at me. "Not entirely," he admitted. I explained it. If Kyle had been deeded 40% of my condo, I would have been legally bound to him for every future decision about the property. Refinancing, selling, renting, renovation. Any of those decisions would require his agreement. And if he ever had creditors, liens, or judgments against him, which, given the pattern Amber had described, was not an unreasonable concern, those creditors could potentially make claims against his interest in my home. My father was quiet for a long time. "We didn't think about any of that," he said. "I know," I said. We talked for 2 hours. By the end, I believed, and I still believe, that my parents had convinced themselves they were doing something reasonable. They were wrong. They had been wrong in a way that could have seriously damaged my financial life and my legal standing as a homeowner. But they had not been malicious. I told my father that I would not be repaying $20,000 or adding Kyle to my deed. That was not negotiable, and the legal reality supported it fully. But I also told him that I was willing to have a real conversation about Kyle, about what actual, practical, sustainable help might look like, and whether there were options they hadn't considered. He nodded. He paid for the coffee. We walked out to our cars in the parking lot, and he hugged me, stiffly, in the way that men of his generation hug their sons when they've said something difficult and necessary. "I'm sorry, Danny," he said. "We handled this badly." "Yeah," I said. "You did. But we can figure it out." Update 3. The legal side closes. the family side opens. Marcus sent a follow-up letter in early November, after my coffee with my father, noting that absent any formal legal claim from the Mercers, we would consider the matter resolved and take no further action. No lawsuit was ever filed. No claim was ever made. The handwritten note on notebook paper disappeared back into whatever drawer it had come from, and I never heard another word about the family fund. The legal story, in other words, ended quietly. Which is, as Marcus told me, how these things usually end when the documentation is clear and the other party has had time to consult anyone with a law degree. But the family story was more complicated, and I want to be honest about that because I think that's the part of these situations that Reddit threads often skip over in the interest of clean narrative satisfaction. My relationship with my parents was strained through the fall. There were phone calls that were shorter than they used to be. The November family dinner was cancelled, officially because my mother had a cold, unofficially because nobody had figured out how to be in the same room yet. Amber called me regularly, playing the role of diplomatic relay station that younger siblings in functional families should never have to play. Kyle, to his credit, called me in October. It was an awkward call. He opened with, "I want you to know I didn't ask them to do this." I believed him. I told him so. "I don't want part of your place, man," he said. "That's not. I wouldn't want that. It's your home." I asked him what he actually needed. Not rhetorically, I genuinely asked. He was quiet for a while, and then he said something I hadn't expected. "Honestly? I think I need to get out of their house. I think living there is making everything worse. But I don't know how to afford it." We talked for a while about what that might look like. He had some skills, he's good with cars, has always been mechanically gifted, but he'd never formalized any of it. No certifications, no steady employment in the field, just side work and a reputation among people who knew him. I told him I'd think about whether there was something constructive to do with that information. Update 4. What actually helping looks like. This is the part of the story that I'm most deliberate about telling, because it doesn't have the clean revenge story shape that social media tends to reward. Nobody got destroyed. Nobody lost everything. What happened instead was slower and, I think, more real. In December, after some research and several conversations, I connected Kyle with a friend of mine named Greg who runs an independent auto shop in Columbus. Greg was looking for a reliable part-time mechanic who could grow into a full-time role. He wasn't in a position to pay a lot at the start, but he was willing to train, certify, and promote based on performance. It was an honest opportunity, the kind that requires someone to actually show up and do the work. I told Kyle about it. I told him that if he wanted it, it was his to pursue. I'd made the introduction, but I wasn't going to manage his follow-through. He'd have to do that himself. He did. He called Greg. He went in for a meeting. He started part-time in January. As of the time I'm writing this, he's been there for 3 months, has his basic ASE certification, and is moving to full-time in April. He's been looking at apartments. Small ones, in areas he can afford, with a roommate. For the first time in several years, he is building something. I don't say this to take credit for it. Kyle did the work. Greg took the chance. I just made a phone call. What I will say is that none of this would have been possible if I had rolled over in August and handed my brother a 40% stake in my home. That arrangement would have locked both of us into a legal entanglement that served neither of us and would have prevented Kyle from having any reason to build independent stability, because he would have had a stake in mine. My parents, when they understood this, when they saw Kyle actually functioning, called me in February. My mother cried again, but differently this time. My father said, "You were smarter about this than we were." That's not a sentence my father says easily. I'm not sure he'd said anything like it to me before in my adult life. I told him I appreciated it and that I didn't think it was about being smarter, I just had the paperwork. He laughed. A real laugh. The first one in months. Update 5, 8 months out. The full accounting. It is now late March, nearly 8 months since that Sunday dinner with the notebook paper and the overcooked green beans. Here is where things stand. My condo is still mine. 100% mine. The mortgage is current. The equity continues to grow. No one else's name is on the deed. This was never genuinely in legal jeopardy, the documentation made sure of that, but there were weeks in August and September when the stress of it was real and present in my body in the way that family conflict always is, regardless of how clear your legal position might be. Kyle starts full-time at Greg's shop in 3 weeks. He has a lease application in on a 1-bedroom in Westerville, with a roommate from the shop who needed a place at the same time. It's a $825 per month place. He can afford it. That still sounds miraculous to me when I say it out loud. My parents had Christmas at their house this year. I was there. Kyle was there. Amber brought her kids up from Pittsburgh. My father made his chili and my mother made her rolls, and nobody mentioned the letter or the notebook paper or the family fund. After dinner, my father and I sat on the back porch in the cold for a while. He asked about the condo and I told him about the new furnace I'd had installed in October. He asked about work and I told him about the promotion I'm up for in Q2. And then he said, out of nowhere, "I think we got scared, your mother and I. About Kyle. And we handled the fear badly." "Yeah," I said. "I think that's right. I should have just talked to you," he said. Instead of, he gestured vaguely at the months of legal letters and strained phone calls and missed dinners. "You could have," I agreed. "But we got here." He nodded. We sat in the cold for a while longer. Neither of us said anything, which is sometimes the best conversation available. What I learned, a final reflection. I've told this story to a few friends and gotten a range of reactions. Some people want it to be a cleaner revenge narrative. They want the parents to have been more villainous. They want Kyle to be scheming. They want a more decisive legal confrontation. I understand the appeal of that version. It's more satisfying as a story. But the true version, messy as it is, contains the lesson I actually carry out of it, which is this. Documentation is not paranoia. It is respect. When my parents wrote those emails calling the $20,000 a gift, they were not thinking about legal protection, they were just communicating clearly. The documentation that saved my home was created not out of suspicion but out of ordinary written communication. I kept my emails. I kept my texts. Not because I anticipated a conflict, but because I am organized and I don't delete things. That organizational habit turned out to be worth $20,000, minimum. Legal protection and family repair are not opposites. I was advised by more than one person, during the worst of the conflict, to either cave entirely for the sake of family harmony or to pursue maximum legal aggressive action to send a message. Both of those were wrong. The right move was to protect my legal position firmly while leaving the door open for the human conversation. The lawyer handled the legal part. I handled the human part. Neither substituted for the other. The problem you're asked to solve is rarely the real problem. My parents were not actually trying to steal equity from my home. They were trying, badly and illegally and without consulting anyone, to solve the problem of a struggling son. Once I understood that the surface problem, the demand, was downstream of a real problem, Kyle's instability, I could engage with the actual issue rather than just defending against the symptom. Help that creates dependency isn't help. This is maybe the one I think about most. If Kyle had gotten 40% of my condo, he would have had an asset without accountability, a stake in something he didn't build, and no reason to develop the capacities that are currently making his life better. Real help, it turns out, looks like an introduction to a mechanic shop and a conversation where I genuinely asked what he needed instead of being told what to give. I don't know how to end this except to say, get your paperwork right. Not because your family will turn on you, but because clarity is kindness, and documentation is the written form of clarity. If someone gives you something and calls it a gift, get it in writing, not out of distrust, but because written things stay true longer than memory does. My parents loved me when they gave me that money. They also loved me when they tried to take it back, in their confused and frightened way. And they love me now, in the back porch in winter cold way that doesn't require many words. The apartment is still mine. So is the relationship. I'll count that as a win. Edit. For people asking, Marcus charged me for about 6 hours of work total. Worth every dollar. If you're in a real estate dispute with family members, please consult an actual attorney in your state. Laws vary. My situation had unusually clean documentation. Don't assume yours will. Edit 2. No, I'm not sharing the emails publicly. My parents are real people and they made a mistake. They don't need to be internet villains. Edit 3. Kyle says hi. He read a draft of this. His only note was that I understated how good he is with cars. So, he's apparently very good with cars.